Stephen King has written over 60 novels, but only a few can send chills down your spine. What are the top 10 books that stand out among the rest? We're about to find out. We've got a spine-tingling October set for you this month, and today we are diving into the master of horror himself, Stephen King. I've carefully picked my top 10 Stephen King books, and trust me, this was not an easy list to make. I'm basing my choices on the books that have had the biggest impact on me, whether it is unforgettable characters, the terrifying plots, or the way King likes to weave his pure life into these narrative stories. Let's get started. Number 10. The Outsider. The Outsider begins with the gruesome murder of an 11-year-old boy in a small town. All evidence points to Terry Maitland, a beloved teacher and Little League coach. However, as Detective Ralph Anderson digs deeper, conflicting evidence emerges, placing Terry miles away at the time of the murder. As the investigation unfolds, the case takes a supernatural turn, revealing a dark force known as the Outsider, capable of assuming the identity of others. The novel explores themes of justice, grief, and the duality of human nature.
As a number 10, I think it's not a traditional King story. Two reasons that I like this. The novel is something that is a little bit outside of his wheelhouse. King did go down the road of writing a couple of murder mystery detective novels, beginning with Mr. Mercedes, and I did read the Bill Hodges trilogy. Didn't like that very much, but this one I think was better written. I liked how the story opens with accounts from different bystanders and witnesses to the protagonist in the book. I think another key element is the audiobook. So when I'm giving you my top 10, I want you to realize that some of these I have both read and listened to, and then others I have only read. But the majority of these top 10 I have done both, and I think that's important as digital audio becomes more commonplace. Having a good narrator makes the story come alive a little bit more in my eyes than just reading the novel itself. So The Outsider has a excellent narrator. Will Patton, the actor, has done a lot of King books, and this one I actually listened to first. Typically, I'll read the novel and then listen if I'm interested enough. With Audible, that's the app that I use. But this novel, I think, kind of blended this murder mystery, this little detective novel that he had been on a string of, along with his supernatural elements. So I think that was a very good tie-in. I think the pull to this one was the fact that he used an innocent, prominent townsperson as being imitated by this entity, and I'll kind of leave it at that. I'm trying to not do any spoilers here. So as you read the novel, you're basically reading two sides of the story. You're reading about what the detective is doing and how he is investigating, and you're also reading about how this main character, his name is Terry Maitland, how he is using his attorney to basically go down the other route to prove his innocence. And that's how we set up the opening of the book, is that we're looking at an incident that has happened in this small town and how he is being accused of a murder and what is really happening on the backside. So I thoroughly enjoyed this novel. It made it into the top 10 because of the way that he tied that thriller suspense along with his supernatural activity. So that's my number 10, The Outsider.
Number 9, Duma Key. After a devastating accident leaves Edgar Fremantle with a shattered body and mind, he moves to the remote island of Duma Key to recover. There, he discovers a newfound talent for painting, but his art begins to manifest strange and terrifying powers. As Edgar paints, he uncovers dark secrets buried on the island and must confront the malevolent force that lies beneath its beauty. Duma Key is a story of trauma, healing, and the haunting power of the past.
So Duma Key, once King kind of made his way down to Florida. He lives outside of Sarasota on Longboat Key, or at least we think he does. He had 2 novels released that were his take on love and on tragedy. One of those made it into my top 10 list. Number 9 is Duma Key. The alternate to that one is called Lizzie's Story. And so Duma Key I enjoyed better because it was more about trauma and tragedy and how do you overcome that. And so for me, this one became a more important story. For me, I think that King does a really good job of taking real world elements but turning them or giving them a supernatural or thriller spin. And so Duma Key is essentially that. And I guess Edgar, which is the main character, coming into this is trying to overcome trauma, and again, no spoilers here, and picking up the painting. He ends up basically what we would consider to be into a back and forth with the house, and the house is essentially haunted, or he is confronting, let's say, ghosts. And as you read this novel, the way that it's written, you're trying to figure out whether or not this is inside of his head or this is, actually happening in this house. And so I think for this novel, for me, being a lover of art, this one is the most artistic of King's works, along with trying to overcome trauma. And I could be wrong, but I believe that I read when this novel first came out is when King was just over the hump of being hit by that car and completely shattered his leg and other parts of his body. But he was attempting to come through all of that, as well as getting off the painkiller, so to speak, because he does have, very admittedly, an addictive personality, and so he'd already battled through some of that in his earlier writing years. This one kind of came up again with prescription drugs, and so he used art to basically help himself get through the accident. And so this is more along the lines of self-therapy when you look at this book. And so again, it's very well written, very simplistic setting, but the beach hook, along with this person trying to overcome, again, it's just not a traditionally written novel and not a traditionally written Stephen King novel. So his take on that is again why this one is number 9, Duma Key.
Number 8, Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep serves as a sequel to The Shining, following a grown-up Danny Torrance as he struggles with alcoholism and the lingering effects of his traumatic childhood. Now known as Dan, he finds solace in helping the dying pass peacefully with his shining abilities, earning him the nickname Dr. Sleep. However, his quiet life is disrupted when he encounters Abra Stone, a young girl with a powerful shine who is being haunted by a group called the True Knot, immortal beings who feed on the psychic energy of children. Together, Dan and Abra must confront the True Knot and demons of their past.
I'm going to try not to talk all day long about the next one. Number 8, and it's only number 8 because there are so many better ones on this list. But number 8 is Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep, of course, is the second novel or the follow-up novel to The Shining. We're not going to talk about movies. We're only going to talk about the books on here. And so number 8 is Dr. Sleep. Again, a book that I have both read and listened to because, again, the narrator is Will Patton. Love his voice. Love the way that he brings almost a different life to King's novels when he is the narrator. So, of course, we've got Danny Torrance, the main character from The Shining, although now he's an adult and he is going through his own similar, let's say, incidents and traumas that his father was in the first novel. And we do start out beginning with the day after The Shining. And so, again, you need to realize that we're not talking about movie tie-ins here because they're different. The books are different. They've ended differently from the first novel to the second. And so, another character that we see in this book that you didn't see in the movie is Dick Halloran, which is the cook at the Overlook Hotel in the first novel, who in the movie dies, and he is very much alive and is used all throughout this novel. I really like the way that King continued on this story and did not really get outside of the realm of possibility as he continued, because he said in many interviews that the number one question he would get from fans is, what do you think Danny Torrance is up to these days? And so when we start, and correct me, I apologize if I'm wrong, I think he's 35-ish. After we get out of the first few chapters to let you know what happened when they left the Overlook Hotel. And so you kind of get pulled in from the continuation of the first story in The Shining. And then the new hook, if you will, the new plot, is that as he is an adult, he finds someone else who has The Shining, who was very small. Dick Halloran, again, in the first story, tells him there will come a time that he will have to help, just like Dick helped Danny in the first book. And so you have these individuals called the True Knot, who we find out is the supernatural bunch who takes this Shining and uses it as food. So now you have this back and forth between Danny trying to help Abra, that's her name in the book, and then the True Knot trying to find her because she has a stronger Shining than Danny does. Again, for me, the only reason it's number 8 is because there are older, better written stories, but this book, the book is pretty great. The audio narration is even better. So if you like The Shining or have read The Shining or haven't, you definitely want to take both books and sit down and read both books back to back. You're not going to be able to fully appreciate the first several chapters of Dr. Sleep without having read The Shining. So number 8 is Dr. Sleep, but that one was a toughie for me because it is very well written.
Number 7, Bag of Bones. Bag of Bones follows Mike Noonan, a best-selling author who suffers from writer's block after the sudden death of his wife, Jo. Seeking solace, Mike retreats to their summer home in rural Maine, only to discover that it is haunted by restless spirits. As he unravels the mystery of the house and its connection to a young widow and her daughter, Mike uncovers a dark secret that threatens to destroy them all. The novel is a gothic tale of grief, love, and the power of the past to shape the present.
Number 7. Again, this starts to get tough. Number 7 is Bag of Bones. Number 7 is Bag of Bones. I can go ahead and get this out of the way only because this is Stephen King's ode to Daphne du Maurier, which might have my all-time favorite book. Could be, arguably, top 3 all-time favorite authors as well. And again, it has a series after it, like most of Stephen King's books. Wasn't popular enough to have a full-fledged movie, However, Pierce Brosnan starred in whatever channel, I can't remember if it was Lifetime or who it was, that did this story of Bag of Bones. Again, we're going to put that aside. We won't address that and how that's different. This is solely on the book. And we've got this character again, Mike Noonan, which is very close to a few other characters' names in King's repertoire. He is an author, and King does a really great job. There's a couple of other novels he does where the main character is an author to take you through, this time with writer's block. But he keeps coming back to Manderley. If you guys haven't read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, you have to. You absolutely have to. And we'll get into a different series that talk about my all-time favorite authors. But he keeps referring back to this book. This is his favorite book, and he's trying to write something akin to that. And he keeps comparing her to what he's trying to overcome. And so, in this one, I think, again, we've got more along the lines of dealing with grief. His wife has passed away. He has this special place, let's say, that he goes, that him and his wife went, and suddenly starts seeing the big magnetic letters. I had them on my fridge as a kid, but on the fridge being put into different messages. And this was something that the couple did when they were together, to let one of them know if they were leaving the house and the other one wasn't there, or if Mike was out riding in the back, or where his wife was going. This time, however, we've got a little bit more of a hook where we are having the wife make Mike, or tell Mike, he needs to help. And again, I won't go any further than that, but there is a situation from the past that happened on this property. And so now that she's gone, she's trying to get him to help. And in doing so, what we more or less have is a type of amalgam that overcoming this allows him to open up more creatively. So again, excellent writing, great writing. I will say King does pull a lot of elements from Daphne's book of Rebecca. And so, again, while it's a very well-written book, it would not be on this list if you didn't have the understanding or the respect for Daphne du Maurier, and King does. So again, this is another one where it's landed on the list, but it's because I have read the other book. If you'd asked me this list several years ago, I probably wouldn't have put this one on the top 10 because I hadn't discovered Daphne du Maurier. Julie introduced me to that author. So I would tell you that to do it justice, you would read Rebecca first, and then you would come back and you would read Bag of Bones, and I think you would get a better appreciation of both authors by reading that book first. So that one, Bag of Bones, number 7.
Number 6, Needful Things. In the small town of Castle Rock, Maine, a new shop called Needful Things opens, run by the mysterious Leland Gaunt. The store offers items that seem to fulfill each customer's deepest desires, but at a dark and twisted price. As the townspeople fall under Gaunt's spell, their hidden fears and hatreds are manipulated, leading to chaos and violence. Needful Things is a commentary on greed, consumerism, and the destructive nature of human desires.
Number 6, in the 90s, you could not get away from Castle Rock Entertainment, whether it was a movie that was produced by Castle Rock or it was a Stephen King book. He has an entire bank of Castle Rock stories that you can search on Amazon, because this fictional place he used quite often in his writings in the 90s. He bought a movie corporation and named it Castle Rock Entertainment. Needful Things is number 6. That is my favorite Castle Rock story. And so this one, again, not a movie. It was a TV series. I think it was two. 90s. We won't talk about that. This one is one I have not listened to on the Audible, but it is a very well-written story. This one is another one that I read only recently, and I say recently, and within the last 8 years, so not when it first came out. I think this one has to do solely with greed. I think what you are doing is really setting up a story of morality. As this shop opens, like we said in the summary, we are doing trades here. And so growing up, I'll say this too, growing up in a small town, we have the same setting here, where it is a small town, it's a sleepy town. The sheriff is one of those guys that nothing really bad has happened in the history of the town. And so we have a new shop, which is rare, and someone out of town that moves in that is new, which is rare. And so you have this culmination of what are the real intentions here. You never get a full understanding either whether this is supernatural or this guy's just a shyster. But I love the dialogue is what stands out in this novel for me. I enjoyed, even though, again, read it in the late 2000 teens, I enjoyed the step back, if you will, into the 90s. He set that time period up extremely well. And again, coming from small town America, did an excellent job of setting that town up too. And so I think for me, it was a little bit of nostalgia reading that. But again, the dialogue just bangs out. I do believe that it did not make a great movie, or you wouldn't really put in the cost to make a movie out of this, because this is one of those novels that is a novel by itself. To translate that onto the screen would not do a great job, because it makes you take it home and think about it. And what I mean is, think about what decision you would do in this situation or in that situation, because you end up meeting a lot of townsfolk, but only as they come into that store, needful things. And so you kind of start to play out in your head how you would have done things differently. And I don't know that you could have done that very well on the big screen. So like I said, it was a 2-part miniseries. I've seen it, and even from the miniseries point of view, it didn't really translate. It's not one of, the higher ranked films or books actually on the generic Stephen King's list. But for me, this one is a really good one. If you like to read very in-depth dialogue, you want to get that, that morality of the yin and yang, this one's a great one. Number 6, Needful Things.
Number 5, Misery. Misery tells the harrowing story of Paul Sheldon, a best-selling author who is kidnapped by his number one fan, Annie Wilkes, after a car accident. Trapped in her isolated home, Paul is forced to write a new novel in his popular Misery series, as Annie becomes increasingly unstable and violent. The novel is a tense psychological thriller that delves into the relationship between creator and consumer, as well as the destructive nature of obsession.
We are getting down to the nitty-gritty now. Number 5. I cannot believe we are halfway through this list. Number 5. It starts getting extremely tough now. We start splitting hairs, and these all, I think, are considered to be classic King novels. Number 5 is Misery. Number 5 could be number 1 for me. Misery is excellent. Misery is excellent. Misery translates on the screen. Misery translates on the audiobook. This is one of the ones that went across all bounds. And I think the reason why it did translate so well on the screen was because of the actors. So we'll set that aside. Misery itself, again, we've got another author who is the main character, Paul Sheldon. Paul Sheldon is a series writer. who is writing the Misery series. Misery Chastain, I think, is the main character's name. And he is done, right? He has finished all of the series. He is tired of writing this series. He wants to go about and do other things. And a very fanatical fan, his number one fan in her eyes, doesn't want that to happen. She just happens to be an RN. And so you have an accident wherein Paul is trapped in his car. She finds him, and hilarity and evil ensue, let's say. This one actually will have you laughing out loud a little bit if you read the book. It's a little darker. It's a little darker in some places in the movie, and it's a little darker in other places when you actually read the book. So for me, I think, again, the main setting is in the house. So King is great at making that claustrophobic atmosphere. So that's the number one thing. Okay, you get a few chapters in, and basically the entirety of the book is him versus her in this one room, in this bed. It depends on where we are in Paul's injuries as to whether or not we've moved from the bed to the floor out of the room into the house, maybe out of the house. And so you get this, you start getting a little bit of this paranoia and this claustrophobia. And what is she going to do next? You know, what is the, I guess, the edges to what she might do to get what she wants. And so what she wants is him to write a different book. Because in his series, and this isn't really giving too much away, but in the series of the last book, Misery dies because he wants the series to end. This is King's take on fans, and more along the lines fanatical fans. And after this point, he kind of stops doing book tours. And if you look now, there's very few book tours that King ever does when he releases a new book. And it's typically somewhere up in New England that he does these, at local bookstores, or at smaller bookstores, or at smaller colleges. He doesn't do national book tours anymore. And one of the reasons why was because of what he was receiving from fans. So this is his, more or less, this is his take on that. And how far is someone willing to go to try to cross those lines between what's fiction and what's real life. So excellent book, excellent story. It's a very, very easy read. I think it's only 350, 380 pages, which is on the smaller side of King novels. But this one, from start to finish, has you hooked. And I think that's the biggest get and takeaway from Misery, is that it will hook you and make you read as quickly and as fast as you can. It flows so well. And then the ending is nice as well. It's good, and it's different enough from the movie that you would do yourself a favor to read this book and not just the movie. Movie's classic too, but for different reasons. So, number 5, Misery.
Number 4, The Stand. The Stand is an epic tale of good versus evil, set in a post-apocalyptic world decimated by a deadly flu pandemic known as Captain Trips. The survivors are drawn to two opposing figures: Mother Abigail, a kind-hearted old woman representing good, and Randall Flagg, a sinister figure embodying evil. As society rebuilds, the two factions inevitably clash in a final showdown that will determine the fate of humanity. The novel is a sprawling exploration of morality, survival, and the human condition.
Okay, these next 4 I'm going to have to try to be brief on, because I think I could talk about them all day long. But coming in at number 4 is The Stand, which in King's words is his most popular novel from what fans tell him, and it's number 4 on my list, so go figure. This is King's ode to Tolkien. He decided what he was going to do was take the Lord of the Rings series and write an apocalyptic novel set in the United States with a good versus evil. So we have our protagonist, who is Randall Flagg, the Dark Man, which, by the way, comes up in a lot of King stories because this is a recurring nightmare that King has had since he was a teenage boy. And you have the Good, the White Wizard, who is Mother Abigail. And so we have two different forces here. We've got a group of individuals who need to make it from point A to point B, which just happens to be Las Vegas, not Mount Doom. And so we have a hefty novel. I think it's, oh my goodness, I think it's over 1,100 pages, if I'm not mistaken. And again, we've got one who, there's two different versions that came out. We have the original version, which was abridged. So it's under that 1,000-page mark. And then you have the unabridged, which is the one I have read, that came out in the 80s, early 90s, and have also listened to the unabridged version. Now, that's a different narrator, but again, still excellent. And this is the classic good versus evil. I mean, on the very base level, that's what this is. Again, though, I would tell you, if we're taking each one of these books and trying to teach an English class with, this one would be all about character development. He spends his time setting up, I think it's 31 different characters in it. Then he ends up killing half of them. That might be a spoiler alert, but about halfway through the book, he's like, how do I get rid of half of these characters? Let's blow them up. And that's what we did at one point. But you learn, and the reading it now is another little too close to home feeling, but you learn that essentially what's happened is a virus has been released from a military base in Texas called Captain Trips, which acts just like the flu. However, it is fatal. Go figure. And so now we have the individuals left alive who have some sort of natural immunity to it. And so we start to get visions. I think that's the easiest way of saying it. Visions as to where we should go. Should we go to Mother Abigail? Should we go to Randall Flagg, the Dark Man? So now you have the journey of getting to those spots, because we do have character development of both good and bad. And then ultimately you have setting up a town, and then, hey, we've got to go destroy the Dark Man, if you will. So who's going to go and how are we going to do it? So again, very simplistic, but character is extremely important in this one. Excellent read. Do yourself a favor. Number 4, The Stand.
Number 3, It. It follows a group of children known as the Losers Club who band together to confront an ancient evil that terrorizes their hometown of Derry, Maine. The entity, known as It, primarily takes the form of Pennywise the Clown, preying on the children's deepest fears. The story alternates between the Losers Club childhood in the 1950s and their adult lives in the 1980s, as they are drawn back to Derry to face It once again. It is a profound exploration of childhood trauma and the power of memory. Oh, these are so tough. These top 3 are so tough. Number 3, though, was It. Looking at the top 3 stories, I want you to understand they could have been shuffled, for me anyway, in any order. Each one stand out for a particular reason. Each one of them follows King's, storytelling. But number 3 ultimately was It. Now, remember, we're only talking about audiobook and novel. Unfortunately, the movies do not follow the novel completely. The miniseries that Tim Curry so very well acted in doesn't follow the book completely either. This one's another monster. This one's like 1,100 pages. Love the timeline of this one. So we go back and forth between the Losers Club as children and currently as adults. Starts right off the bat as well, giving you a backstory and why all of the losers have to come back to Derry, Maine. Again, a fictional place that comes out of the Castle Rock books that King created. For me, it was very pivotal in my younger years. Not by reading the book first, but, excuse me, by actually watching and being scared to death of Pennywise the Clown, Tim Curry. And that made me, once I got old enough to read the book, to read the book. I need you to understand Stephen King is not easy to read. For me, I make sure that I pay attention going through the book. I read very slowly when I read Stephen King and love the way his sentence structure moves. So again, I had to get big enough, if you will, grown up enough to be able to handle this book. I will also tell you the audio book is excellent. The narrator is different this time. The narrator is an actor by the name of Steve Weber, and he does a great job. So you'll do yourself a favor, either version, listening or reading for sure. It is another book that deals with real life trauma. What you have to do is go back and forth between the supernatural forces. This one is also the first one that I feel like he introduced religion into a novel. And the religion is, we'll say, more tribalistic, very Native American. I won't call it folklore. We'll go along the same lines of cosmic beliefs and the belief system in the New England area back millennia ago. So he'll tie that in. It may sound elementary when you read it. It may sound stupid if you read it when he's talking about the deity. But you need to understand that he's using actual recorded history. I use that in loose quotations because whether or not it's real, they believed it. And so he used that to base this novel around. So again, we're dealing with childhood trauma. We are dealing with adults that have all been through something traumatic in their later years. And so they are all coming back almost as a way to deal, as therapy, if you will. So again, you have to read this book. If you've seen the movie and even liked the movie a little bit, the book does it so much more justice. It also tackles different issues in the book over the course of time between the 50s and I apologize, I can't remember the 80s. I think the late 80s. That one I don't recall. There's so many different timelines in the King novels, and I didn't take the time to look that one up. But it is number 3. It is an excellent. These 3 novels, remember, could all be on Mount Rushmore for different reasons, but this one, Pennywise, excellent. Just the reason why it's 3, flat out honesty here. You've got a perfect book. The ending sucks. And King gets raked over the coals for his endings in a lot of his novels. This one is the first one on the list that I would tell you did not like. Did not like, was not believable, petered out. He's got, an upward trajectory and then just the balloon pops. Literally. So anyway, that's why it ends up being number 3 and not ranked higher on this list. Number 2, The Shining. The Shining tells the story of Jack Torrance, an aspiring writer and recovering alcoholic who takes a job as the winter caretaker of the isolated Overlook Hotel. Jack brings his wife Wendy and young son Danny, who possesses a psychic ability known as The Shining. As the hotel is cut off by snow, Jack begins to succumb to the malevolent forces within the Overlook, while Danny's visions become increasingly terrifying. The novel is a chilling exploration of madness, addiction, and the supernatural. Oh, number two. Why is The Shining number 2 for me? One reason. I had never, in my years of experience and my absolute love, fascination with reading and people who write creatively, Had I ever found a genre, horror, which I absolutely is my favorite, but read a book that read like literature, The Shining does that. That is very simply why The Shining is number 2. The Shining is okay scary. The Shining is, yeah, interesting. The Shining is a pretty good hook. The Shining is about a drunk dad who's trying to salvage his relationship with both his wife and his son by taking a job at a random hotel in Colorado. On the surface, it sounds one-dimensional. It is the way King writes this novel. That's the reason why you read this. That's the reason why Stanley Kubrick's Shining does not hold a candle to the novel. And yes, I said it. And yes, I love the movie for different reasons. If you had anybody else play Jack Torrance, you wouldn't have the movie that you have. You've got to read the book to fully appreciate the story. And if you like literature even a little bit, this book reads like literature. King is writing about himself. King was very much Jack Torrance in a lot of ways during that time when he wrote The Shining. It was his third novel, I believe. And so this one has to be read. Has to be read. This one is top 10 novels of all time. I mean, it just is. You take so many different elements from other authors, all great authors, but you make it almost a self-portrait. Because the story isn't even really about Danny Torrance and The Shine. You really get a much deeper backstory and character development of Jack and what the family has been through before they ever reach the Overlook Hotel. This one has to be read for that reason alone. Now, this one also, I will tell you, is one of those that has not been listened to. They have re-recorded it a few times, so I haven't done the Audible version of that yet. But that may be on the list down the road. You need to understand that sometimes I will get these novels to listen to because of the actor or because I've done a little 2-snippet preview and like the voice or like the way, the speed, the intonation of how it's being read. So I haven't done that with The Shining because The Shining was just up on the mantle, right? The Shining has been read, gosh, I don't know how many times. So The Shining is number 2 because The Shining is a piece of English literature. Now, we could argue that maybe Shelley's Frankenstein, maybe Stoker's Dracula is as well. But for me, I'm thinking modern. And for me, modern horror is this piece stands up there with other books along the same lines. Because horror, let's be honest, horror is not seen or respected as as much of on a higher level as other types of genres of novel. And then you think about your classic literature authors, and you don't talk about Stephen King, but Stephen King was an English lit teacher. You want to do a fascinating study and read about him. You can read his book on writing. That book's not in this top 10 list because to me that's not a novel. That's an autobiography and writing lesson. But that's one of the top 10 greatest books ever written. I mean, in my opinion, for separate reasons. But again, the fascination with The Shining is not Danny Torrance. It's not being able to feel that this hotel is haunted. It is Jack. It is realizing what Jack is going through and the paranoia that he is going through. And you see that through his eyes by reading that novel. Please do yourself a favor and read The Shining. That's why it's number 2 on the list. And finally, at number 1, we have Pet Sematary. Pet Sematary follows Lewis Creed, who moves with his family to a rural town in Maine near an old pet cemetery, spelled cemetery with an S by the children. When tragedy strikes, Lewis learns of a nearby burial ground with the power to bring the dead back to life, but at a terrible cost. As grief overwhelms him, Lewis makes a fateful decision that unleashes a horrifying chain of events. The novel is a haunting meditation on death, grief, and the consequences of defying nature. Okay, number one. Maybe it's not any type of surprise to people. I'm not sure, because the one book, that classic King book, that hasn't made it into the list yet is the one that is misspelled. This one, number one, for me, has to be Pet Sematary. Pet Sematary. Pet Sematary was watched by my young little self, 9, 10 years old, I think. And at the time, because we had HBO when I was a kid, I think that the number one thing that really stood out to me was the damn cat and Gabe, pre and post. I probably don't need to hold back spoilers here, but I'll keep it safe for anyone who might not have read or watched the old movie or the movie that came out a few years ago. Don't watch the movie that came out a few years ago. The movie that came out a few years ago was awful. It did not stick to the novel at all. Why Pet Sematary? For Pet Sematary, it is the scariest book I've ever read. Hands down. The way it is written, the way that the story unfolds, is the reason why Pet Sematary is number one. Because ultimately, King is a horror writer. I can't put a non-horror book at the top. I've seen other videos mention books that aren't even in my top 10. Because I have to give respect where it's due. King is a suspense and horror writer. Pet Sematary is the scariest book that has been written. And you know why? It's because you find out, you think, you fight with yourself what the human body is capable of. And when you go through, again, we're talking about trauma with King. When you go through arguably the hardest trauma a person could go through, what are the ends of the earth that you would go to do to try to reverse that? And again, I'm not going to go into all that. You can probably already know. But for me, again, we're taking real life and we're adding supernatural twist. We're going back in and we are talking about Native American religion, burial grounds. And so this Pet Sematary, of course, is this pet cemetery that the children in the town have created. And it's spelled incorrectly. But we find out that just beyond the tree line, there's another cemetery. So, we come up with some of the greatest characters that King has ever created. And Louis Creed is one of those characters. Now, again, I ended up as an adult having a personal connection because he's a physician. He moves to this town. He becomes the university physician, and his job starts on day one, not the way he was thinking it was going to go. And from that point forward, we got this snowball that continues. And it gets bigger and it gets more difficult to handle and deal with. So, for me, again, I have seen all renditions. I have read novel, audiobook. Amazing. That's another reason why it's number one for me. Absolutely amazing. Michael C. Hall narrates the new version. You have to find the new version if you're going out there and seeking the audiobook. And the way that he uses his voice to narrate this is unbelievable. I cannot tell you how many times that I will re-download, re-listen. This is a have to every holiday season. When fall rolls around and Halloween is coming up, I will listen to Michael, read Pet Sematary. It is unbelievable. So again, you've got two standalones. You'll get a different perspective listening to it versus reading it. It's not a very thick book. So we're not talking about monster pages of 1,000 or more. Very, very readable. Very, very detailed. You need to understand something about King. There are times you have to be mature enough, and I say that respectfully, but you have to be mature enough to read King. What I mean by that is you cannot put the book down. You have to get at least 100 pages into that novel to even figure out what it is about. And I will say that constantly, consistently about King's works. Pet Sematary is number one, not because it reads like literature, but because it is the scariest book written. Hands down, my opinion. And if you listen to it, and you listen to it with the lights out, you're going to get a totally different feel than reading it. And both of those are worth your time because it's a different experience. So for me, plot, character, detail, and love of the horror genre, Pet Sematary ultimately becomes number one.
And there you have it, my top 10 Stephen King list. These were the books that left an indelible mark on me over the course almost of my lifetime, since I was about 12 years old. So, what we've been through today is some unbelievable plot twists, some excellent character development, and some spine-tingling stories.
Just to recap, we covered everything from the supernatural mysteries of The Outsider to the haunting horrors of Pet Sematary. Each of these books offers a unique dive into the dark and twisted worlds that Stephen King so masterfully creates.
Okay guys, I really hope that this list has inspired you to read or maybe reread one of Stephen King's very vast amount of novels over the years. For me, I feel like Stephen King always gets under my skin. Every time I hear he has a new book coming out, it will definitely always be put in the Amazon cart. Please join Julie and I again as we continue through spooky season. And what books did I miss? I love and would love to hear from you in the comments to argue or tell me maybe a book I haven't read or maybe something that I should reread myself and maybe make another top 10 list. Until next time, guys, thank you so much for joining. Have a great day.